Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Low Carb Lifestyle Podcast. Today, I'm here with Temple Stewart, who many of you will know as the Ketogenic Nutritionist. Thanks, Temple, for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you, Tracey. I'm so happy to be here, and this is going to be fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun. So, before we get into it, would you like to just share with everyone, obviously, your work, but also how you came into the ketogenic space?
Sure. So my work now is really different from what I thought I was going to be doing as a dietitian, and what I did for a couple years too. But now I'm a telehealth dietitian. I solely see clients via Zoom and from all over the world, which is really, really cool. And I counsel on the ketogenic diet. So I'm helping women support their bodies, support their hormones, lose weight, and really just feel better. So I love being able to see that progress from just the practice. Now, the way that I got here was a little untraditional. So I have my own kind of health journey that I went through, and in high school and in college, I never had a regular cycle, a menstrual cycle, and I was always kind of just not feeling well. I felt like there was something always off. My face was really oily. I was just having all these problems. I was the heavier girl in school. I was the chunky kid growing up. And so I never felt good about myself, and I never felt quote unquote healthy. And I was an athlete, so I played a lot of soccer and I loved playing sports. And I went to college to play sports, and I just still could not figure out what is going on with my body. Why am I having all these issues? And so I started to become really interested in nutrition as a college athlete and seeing how it could affect my performance, how it could affect the way that I was playing. And I knew I wanted to go into that field. At the time, I didn't realize it was going to be mostly disease related study and less sports nutrition, but I'm so glad that it was. And so over the course of time, I got my internship here in Florida Hospital, and I was working to become a dietitian, like a student residency there in the hospital. And I was still sick, and I felt terrible. I had no cycle. I still was probably about 40 pounds overweight, which is really embarrassing as a dietitian student. You're trying to counsel and talk about eating healthy, but you don't feel healthy yourself. And so long story short, because I could go on, but I essentially went to an OBGYN and an endocrinologist to figure out what was happening with my hormones. Why couldn't I lose weight? Why was I not having a cycle? Just what was going on? And essentially, I got diagnosed with PCOS as well as Hashimoto's hypothyroidism. And what they told me was that, hey, you're kind of stuck with this. These are the cards you've been given. Good luck. It's going to be really challenging getting pregnant. Make sure you save for IVF. I remember them specifically telling me how much IVF costs. And, I'd always dreamed of being a mom and always having a baby. And hear that from your physician as you get a diagnosis is really sad. And so that's what I left the office with. And I was heartbroken, and I had just gotten married, and I went home and told my husband. And, but thankfully I have the personality that won't take that as an answer. And so I started digging, and the first book I came across was Dr. Jason Fung's The Obesity Code. And I read that book, and I remember thinking, oh, this has just opened the floodgates. And so I started reading everything I could get my hands on. The fasting book, the guide to fasting that he wrote with Jimmy Moore. I read Jimmy Moore's books. I was soaking it up as much as I could. I got involved in looking at Virta Health and all their YouTubes and videos. And so I just was literally like a sponge trying to get that information. And so essentially I healed my PCOS. I reversed it, and I got pregnant naturally within about a 2.5 year time span, as well as
Wow.
reversing my Hashimoto's all through food. And so that's really what propelled me into this now as helping women, be, because I have such a passion, because it just completely changed my whole world.
Yeah, I think when you are driven from such a personal experience, it just takes you to another level, doesn't it? In terms of what you do, like that rabbit hole. I mean, that's so common. Everyone I talk to in the space, has been mostly driven there from a personal issue, and then you go down this rabbit hole, and it's like, oh, what, and then you get angry. Why are we told this? Why are we still told the wrong thing? Why are young girls today who have problems with their cycle or get diagnosed with PCOS told you know, oh, well, you know, here's a pill, go on the pill. There's nothing we can do. Why is that still happening?
I really wish I had an answer, and that's why I'm so vocal on social media about reversing PCOS, because I would say there's been one client that I've had, and out of hundreds, that told me, "Hey, my doctor recommended a ketogenic diet, that's why I'm here." One out of, I mean,
One.
I've counseled hundreds of clients with PCOS, and it's awful because when you look at for infertility especially, it's not just the cost of IVF, it's an emotional I mean, it plays a huge role. It plays a role in your marriage. I just spoke and it was talking about the devastation it can cause in a marriage because of the anxiety and the finances and all these things. And it really it's and years. Some people go through multiple cycles or multiple cycles on Clomid, and while that's great and it's such a good option for people that have true infertility, if we could really get the message out there that PCOS can be reversed, insulin resistant can go down and can heal, and you can have a baby without spending $30,000 trying to conceive, not to mention all of the emotions that come with that.
Mm. So let's talk about then why you're not stuck with it, with the diagnosis of PCOS. Can you explain, you know, what's going on there and then what we can do to reverse it?
There's several types of PCOS, so I'd like to put that out there. The most common is insulin resistant PCOS, but there is like inflammatory PCOS, which can also be healed with the ketogenic diet, as well as like from the pill, which is where you've kind of messed your hormones up so bad with birth control that it takes a little bit of time and some care to get that back in order. But I really want to focus on the inflammation and insulin resistant related PCOS. And essentially, to put it in a very kind of simple term, and I actually heard this from Dr. Bickman, who I highly respect, and he said it was essentially diabetes of the ovaries. And
Mm.
it's really when you know, everyone kind of presents in a different way, but insulin is really causing a lot of issues with those reproductive hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and especially testosterone and DHEA. And so essentially, your body is doing the same thing that we think about with insulin resistant and not tolerating sugar well, the having to release too much insulin to take care of too much sugar and becoming kind of numb to that hormone. It's the same kind of scenario that's happening in the ovaries, and that's really what causes the infertility. Is it impacts the whole cycle of ovulation. And so yeah, that's essentially what it causes. And you know, what's sad is that women with PCOS are at a much higher risk for gestational diabetes. So if they do get pregnant, now their baby is at risk, as well as they're at risk for either diabetes during the pregnancy or down the line. So there's a lot of things that come with PCOS that are just not spoken about enough. But yeah, essentially, I think to put it in a simplistic term is diabetes of the ovaries.
Mm. So, what do you recommend as a nutritionist, and what did you do in terms of using food to reverse that? Because I think it's important to discuss because a lot of people have a very different, you know, opinion here around, you know, whether it low carb, whether it's just taking sugar out. You know, do you believe that you really need to go ketogenic for this issue?
No, I think this is a case by case situation. Like if the individual is not super insulin resistant and it's just keep going all the way into ketosis is not realistic, then I think, okay, let's focus on low carb and getting the processed junk out of your diet that's causing inflammation. Any processed refined grains, any sugars, any omega-6 oils, any of that stuff. Let's get that out. If the individual is very insulin resistant and they want to get really pregnant as quick as possible, or their time is kind of running out, maybe they're a little bit older in their 30s or whatever,
Mm.
then
Mm.
yes, I absolutely think, hey, you can get on keto. Where it gets tricky is there's not a ton of research with ketosis in pregnant women. Obviously, that's unethical. You can't do experiments or research on pregnant women. Now, there's some studies in regards to women that follow it for epilepsy and other things. So it does get a little tricky, but I think it's absolutely safe to get pregnant doing. And you can really, really focus heavy on meat and vegetables and those healthy fats. And I always like to put the disclaimer anytime I'm talking about going keto that the focus is on clean keto, right? Now the food industry has come up with all the things, keto, cereals, and all the things. But if you're an
Mhm.
inflamed young lady with PCOS and you have insulin resistance, you don't want to to go with those processed packaged keto foods. You really want to focus on a whole food ketogenic diet. And so to answer your question, I think it definitely depends on the individual, and the quicker when you go into ketosis, it reduces insulin quicker, and you can get sensitive quicker. So I think you can kind of judge based on the situation.
That's great. That's great advice. It's interesting you mentioned the keto foods and stuff. I mean, this is but over 8 years I've been, I was 40, insulin resistant, overweight. I was a personal trainer, and same issue. And what's going on? I'm exercising and I'm getting fatter. I don't understand what's happening, right? And yeah, I mean, back then everything it was so hard to find everything I needed, and I've just seen an explosion, particularly in the last 5 years, of these keto foods. And now a lot of people start on the diet and think it's just about swapping it from that version of processed junk to the keto version. And I love how you say that, because it is just processed junk really, but just has a different label, doesn't it?
And honestly, I think while it's great, there are some really like cool products. I'm like, man, this is really makes things easy. There are some ones that I'm like, this is just awful. This is just awful. And if you fix insulin resistant, but you promote inflammation, are we just going in circles? Because that's what I feel like some of these keto products do is, they've got a ton of artificial preservatives, MSG, they've got dyes and omega-6 oils and all these things. And some keto products too, and I don't know how it is where you are, Tracey, but our government doesn't regulate labels well. And so
No.
you can slap a label like keto friendly. Well, any food on planet Earth is technically keto friendly. It just depends on how much of it you eat, right? So it gets messy really quick. And I think this is, I have a lot of frustration with some of these food corporations, because it's not helpful, and it can be super confusing for someone who's trying to do this, as a beginner.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's why they need to come and see someone like you. And like, I'm involved in a lot of support groups. I run a lot of support groups, and people sort of say, how do I do it? Help me with, and of course it is very individual. I always say, just go and see a professional who knows what they're talking about in terms of low carb. And if you set off on the right path, it's so much easier than starting out and ending up anywhere. And then of course if it doesn't work, they go, oh, it's the diet. I'm not gonna do it. It's so worth coming to someone like you.
I think so. I do. And I think there, I've had a lot of clients too that also say exactly what you just said. I didn't know what I was doing. I was confused. It was frustrating. It was hard. But I've also had some clients that just got the keto flu and didn't feel good and then quit, and all that
Yes.
stuff can be avoided. But I love what you said about starting out on the right foot. I couldn't agree more.
Mm-mm. Can I ask you, just going back to the pregnancy a little bit? So, you reversed your PCOS, you managed to get pregnant, as you say. Now, this is obviously just a chat, and I know it can be controversial, but I do get asked a lot, is it safe to do keto when you're pregnant? And I know it's individual, and, this is just a chat, but I'd love to know what you did when you got pregnant. How did your diet change when you actually got pregnant?
Great question, and this is probably one of my most popular questions as well. So I followed a loose ketogenic diet through pregnancy because I knew I have PCOS. I'm at risk. I didn't really know where my fasting insulin was falling, but I knew that I was at higher risk for gestational diabetes. Now at this point, I wasn't super concerned about it because I had been following keto for a couple of years, and I knew I was really probably healthier than most. But I did follow a ketogenic diet loosely. I tried to listen to my body. One thing that I have a little bit of an advantage of that someone might not is I really tracked my sugars quite a bit when I was pregnant, and wore CGM to make sure that things were going where they were. But I did follow keto, and I felt great. Honestly, I gained about 27 to 29 pounds, I believe, at the end of the pregnancy. Lost it all within breastfeeding. So it was I can't complain about my pregnancy because I felt so good. I didn't have any. They were so impressed with my sugars and my blood pressure because it was like a dream, and my sugars stayed low and stayed good, and I wasn't even close to being, preeclamptic, anything like that. And so it was, yeah, it was a really good pregnancy, a really healthy pregnancy, and baby, yeah, it just all, it was great. So I did follow keto. I follow keto loosely now, breastfeeding. Again, with breastfeeding, you have to be it's even more tricky than, in my opinion, pregnancy is with keto. But I listen to my body, and I'm really keenly aware of anything that goes, and it doesn't often do that. But um, yeah, that would be my answer. But lots of whole foods when I was pregnant.
I had one of those babies. So I've got 5 kids, and from my first 4, pretty clueless around diet, was just doing the standard stuff. And after baby 4, I couldn't lose the weight, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, my journey took off. But with my final one, I, was keto, and I, very much stayed in that while I was pregnant with him. Dream pregnancy, dream baby. But what was interesting though, and this is where I think it's so, hormones just play such an important part. But after I had him, and I breastfed him for about 19 months, but I mean, I must have put on in the end, I put on like 12, 13 kilos. My others, I was like 25 kilos, like huge difference. But I did not lose the weight at all. And I wasn't really trying, very much about, just following my body, exactly what you said. But I did not lose the one bit of weight until I stopped breastfeeding him. And he was 19 months then when I finally said, okay, it's time.
Good for you. I love that. Yeah, yeah, I love that. That's a healthy babies, but I love that. And I always tell people too, there's not a lot of info on keto and pregnancy, but there's a lot of info on gestational diabetes and pregnancy. And what we know happens to mom and happens to baby long term in the womb, we know that that is not something we want. So anytime someone asks me about keto and pregnancy, I think it's a great question, and I always kind of say, well, hey, look at the research, but also understand that gestational diabetes and having high blood sugar while your child is in utero is really, really is not ideal for you or for them.
Absolutely. Can I ask you a little bit about Hashimoto's as well? Because I wasn't aware that you also had been diagnosed with that. So where is that sitting for you now? And would you do anything differently, say, if you had, obviously yourself having both PCOS and Hashimoto's? Is it kind of a very similar pathway in terms of healing?
And those two really kind of go hand in hand. If you look at a lot of the research, it's really interesting. Autoimmune disease is really on the rise too. It's rapidly rising among women. But yeah, I got diagnosed with Hashimoto's at the same time. The Hashimoto's was a little bit more tricky for me to figure out exactly what was going on, as there's a lot of triggers. Coffee, nightshade vegetables, mold exposure, really anything can trigger Hashimoto's. So my PCOS, it was rapidly improving. I was struggling a little bit when I went keto initially because I did a little bit of the dirty keto thing, and I was still doing a ton of dairy and a lot of things that processed dairy and processed foods that were those keto foods. So I think a lot of that was really keeping my Hashimoto's inflamed and kind of rearing its head.
Mm.
Eventually, I did a mild, like an AIP keto, where I basically did the autoimmune protocol called while staying keto, and that is ultimately what got my Hashimoto's into remission. And I haven't had much issue with Hashimoto's since then. After pregnancy, I will say it did flare up again, but because I had felt so good before, I was able to acknowledge it and see, okay, maybe it's this and maybe it's that. So I was really quickly able to bring those levels back down.
Yeah, that's great. So with the AIP keto, how did that look? What did that look like?
Hard. It was like almost carnivore for a little bit, if I'm being completely
Yeah.
honest, because I like had to remove everything. I was really stuck. And I was already limiting quite a bit, but I really couldn't figure it out. Ultimately, I figured out that nightshade vegetables were causing me some issues, and a lot of those are low carb, so I was eating a lot of
Mm.
them. I also figured out that onions and garlic were kind of causing some issues. I didn't realize it, but I was using a ton of onion and garlic powder, and so that I think was causing me some issues. But there's so many things that can come from food intolerances that you don't think about, like your face flushing or your cheeks becoming hot, or little things that you're like, oh, that can't be related to food, right? And it
Yeah.
really is. So yeah, the AIP was a little, I essentially kind of went down to carnivore, and then I added one thing at a time until I felt okay. And honestly, anytime my Hashimoto's kicks back up, I just did a stint for about a week or so, and this was after pregnancy because it kind of kicked back up. So yeah, that's kind of how I navigated that, and then I avoided some of the things, caffeine and other or coffee and some of the other things that I knew to trigger Hashis.
Well, because I got diagnosed about 18 months ago, and I did a very similar thing. I actually went carnivore for about 6 months, and yeah, managed to put everything,
Hmm.
everything's normalized. But it's interesting what you say about food, because the reason I went to get checked out is because I was getting all this heat at night, and I thought I was going through, maybe I was starting menopause. Yeah, so I thought I better go and get checked and see where everything is. And I wasn't with menopause, but the Hashimoto's was picked up. So that is very true. For me, it was just this enormous heat. It turned out for me it was egg whites were a real issue. They were causing, yeah, right. And eggs huge on the keto. But after I took them out and I, did, the healing, and I actually did a lot of work on my emotional stuff as well. Like I actually am able to have them now fine. Like I don't have any, issue.
The same for me.
Mm.
I think once you figure them out, the problem foods, and you can kind of figure out, okay, can I have them cooked? Can I have them raw? How much can I have? And you're right. I think once you get the gut healed and you kind of get that inflammation down and you start feeling good again, I agree. I was able to add a lot of stuff back in. I know it's hard to go
Mm.
without eggs, right? You can't be keto and go without eggs. That's a challenge.
I know it was. I'm like, I had to do the whole, "Oh, what am I going to eat?" I mean, I did figure it out. There's still
Yeah,
plenty you can eat. And then
totally.
when I did start putting them, like I tried to the experiment, and I just started with the yolks because we know that they're usually not as inflammatory as the whites, right? And that was okay. And then I had a day where I'm like, oh, I can't be bothered to separate it. I'm just going to put them all back in, and then back. It hit me. I'm like, oh,
Really.
okay, yeah,
Well,
need a
then,
bit longer.
yeah, yeah. It's good that you found out though.
Oh, absolutely. Like it's one of those things that can be, it's a frustrating journey at times. And there's some days you're just like, "Ah," but it is so wonderful to know. And then of course get to the point where, things have healed, and, like I probably wouldn't have, I wouldn't have 4 days every day. I certainly have days where I break it up. But you just, again, when you listen to your body, it's telling you, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Can I ask you a little bit about, diet culture? I've seen you post a little bit around, your views on. There was a post you did the other day. Following a diet culture isn't toxic. Glorifying being skinny women is. Stop shaming women for trying to lose weight. And I loved that post, and I was very fascinated with what your context was around that. Can you talk, share with us a little bit about where that post comes from and what you see around this?
I speak out on these things because it seems like there's a real culture of, if you're pursuing weight loss, then you're bought into diet culture and all you care about is being skinny, and there's this real turn of events, and I don't necessarily disagree with all of it, but I really don't think that it's helpful. Diet culture, following a diet is not in itself toxic, and that's what I meant by the post. Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to feel good and wanting to lose weight and wanting to heal yourself. If you're doing it for the wrong reasons, that's where I believe that toxicity comes in, is if it's a purely, and even if it is a cosmetic thing for you, I think that's fine too. I think where the toxicity comes in is with obsession and with doing unhealthy things to reach that point and destroying your relationship with food in efforts to reach that point. And I think a
Mm,
lot of the toxicity, and what I put in the caption, and the reason we're kind of everyone's like rebelling against diet culture, is because what we've told people works for 50 years is actually failing, and failing really miserably. What I was taught in school to tell people how to lose weight and how to control diabetes is literally the exact opposite of what I teach now. And so I think a lot of the toxicity comes around and people get so frustrated with diet culture because this is a big movement. And it especially, yeah, it's very, very big. And I get the premise, and the reason, and the root cause, if you want to call it that, is that diets don't work if you're not doing the correct thing, and you're calorie counting, and you're doing everything in moderation, and you're still allowing, moderate, like, just those things just don't work. They don't. And if they did, we wouldn't be in the scenario that we're in right now with this huge obesity issue and health issue, and it's only projected to get worse. And so that's my heart behind it. I hope that made sense. Is it's not necessarily, I just want people to know that wanting to be better and to lose weight is nothing to be ashamed of, and it's okay. It's when it's taken to obsessive levels and becomes unhealthy, that's when it becomes toxic. But following a diet in itself is not inherently wrong. Did that make sense, Tracy?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely,
good.
absolutely did, and I see it too. Said before we started recording, I have clients coming to me going, "Oh, I'm like, well, what are you looking for? What are you hoping for? Oh, I'd really like to lose some weight," and I'm like, "Great," like, "Oh, but they feel guilty." It's like, where did we get to a point where we now feel guilty for wanting to lose weight? And I think you're right. I mean, we love to judge, we love to put people in the same box, but you know, what's gone on over the last 50 years has just made it virtually impossible for people to get where they want to be with their health. And then, of course, it's not the diet, we blame ourselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and on top of all of that, then you have the media and everything else showing us images of unrealistic bodies and all these other things that just feeds into all of it. So you're right. It's spot on, Tracy. It's really created quite the hot mess.
It has. But when we understand, and I'd love you to sort of explain to my listeners around, well, it is a hormonal issue, and weight loss, I kind of explain, it's like the side effect. Weight gain, weight loss is the side effect of what is going on, hormonally. And you've talked about obviously insulin with PCOS, but how does it work in terms of, weight loss and weight gain?
Yeah, and so there's three things that cause insulin resistance. Obviously, overconsumption of carbohydrates, inflammation, and there's another one, and I'll remember in a second. But insulin is like the big daddy hormone for fat storage. And so when that's out of whack, it just kind of throws everything else down the line out of whack. Another big problem with women too is estrogen dominance, which is I'm
Mm.
seeing a lot of that more and more nowadays, just with the chemicals that are surrounding us on our receipts and in our water and everywhere. So yeah, when insulin resistance is present, insulin resistance equals weight loss resistance. It's so hard to lose weight when your insulin is not in check, because its whole job is to store. And so when you're working against that, it's super frustrating. It's very stressful. And what people tend to do is they tend to lower their calories more and more and more, which obviously in turn lowers their basal metabolic rate more and more and more. And so now you're in this huge conundrum of, I can't lose weight, I'll lower my calories. I'm not getting nourished. I'm not getting enough cholesterol and healthy fat. My hormones are starting to not have the backbones that they need. So it just creates like a fire on the inside that's just, nothing is in sync. Your hormones aren't working correctly. Insulin's messed up, and estrogen's overrunning. And so it's just kind of a mess, I guess, is a good way to describe it, is a mess. And when you look at weight loss holistically and as like a whole instead of just calories, and you look at it as like hormones and healing, then you pull down inflammation, you pull down insulin, and then you learn, okay, well, where does estrogen dominance come from? Are all my detoxifying pathways working correctly? And that's when I believe weight loss really truly happens, is when the body starts to heal. Just like you said, weight gain is a symptom of something deeper.
Yeah, yeah. And that's so fundamental, I think, for people to understand, because if we're working with all that, and then we go to someone that says, "Oh, just eat everything in moderation, just eat less, move more," it's kind of like you have no chance. Really have no chance, do you? And that's not their fault.
No. No, and what's so hard about that is that, I mean, sometimes it honestly does damage. Like if you look at the Biggest Loser studies, all
Mm,
of them, their metabolic rates tanked, and it didn't come back. And so I think that this preaching, this calories in, everything in moderation, and you're still like basically feeding this flame of inflammation, which is in turn causing insulin resistance, but they're also having processed carbohydrates. And it's just like you said, it's not their fault. They're doing what they've been told, and it's making things worse.
And I think that eventually leads to this whole, I see it as a trauma response when we sort of say, oh, well, this whole body diet culture movement, body image movement, which I want people to love themselves. It has to come from within, but there is another way, and we just got to try a different path rather than kind of giving up. And how many people do you get come to you? Like, I imagine, because with me, it's like I've tried everything. I have literally, one of the questions I ask is, tell me what diets you've tried in the past, and there will be everything. And it's kind of like, they're defeated.
Every client I have has tried to lose weight, especially working primarily with women. I can't say I've had one client that came to me and said, you know what? I've never tried losing weight before. This is my first go at it. It's every single one. And to me, and this is why I'm so passionate about it, because it's sad. It truly is. And I was in that stage of when I was going through my PCOS things. I tried everything, and I tried everything from veganism to Weight Watchers. I was downloading Noom. I was doing the whole thing. And I only did that for like a year and a half. I can't even imagine what it's like to do that for 4 years. It's emotionally, and to have that just kind of be the burden that you're carrying all the time, it's sad. It's not right.
Yeah.
And it can be changed.
Yeah, and it is very sad because we take, as I said, we think it's our fault. So just undoing all that is so important. And I mean, I love it when you see clients that are, they're 65, and it's never too late. There's always hope. I mean, you change it. Your body has a huge healing capacity when we get all that right.
Yeah, totally, totally. And those are some of my best clients, really. And I see a lot of progress in that age demographic. You're right. It's never too late. And I always like to look back. And another thing that a lot of my clients say is like, you know what? It would be great to lose weight, but I would really love to be able to play with my grandkids until I'm, 80, 90, 100 years old. And so I think sometimes that mindset shifts a little bit, is like, weight loss is great, but like, I want to be alive, but not just
Yeah.
alive. I want to be able, like, I want to have a good quality of life, and I think that's another really great internal motivator of it's weight, yes, as health and indicates things, but really like how you feel, and are you living, and are you able to play with your kids without hurting, and getting short of breath, and I think that's a big deal too.
Do you think you can have metabolic health but still be overweight?
Great question. Yes, I do. I do, to a degree. And I don't want to get too much into the hypertrophic fat cell gain, all that. That's Dr. Bickman's wheelhouse. He's a pro there. I do think you can, and I've seen quite a bit of this when I was a clinical dietitian for 3 years. I would see occasionally people come in, to an extent. I think there's a level that it becomes there. Yeah, I would say that's my answer. To an extent, I do think that there's risk with obesity, period, and there's
Yeah.
risk with high hip to waist ratio, period. And one thing a lot of people don't understand too is that people think that fat cells are just kind of these blobs of nothing, and that's not true. They're like endocrine. I mean, they've got hormones, they've got inflammatory cytokines. They are doing some things, and so I think I do. And I want to add to this too. I do not necessarily agree with the BMI standards of health either, in a way. So I think a lot of people are probably classified overweight, obese, that are probably decently metabolically healthy. But that gets into a complicated thing regarding the BMI. But so to answer your question again, I was a little vague there. I think it kind of depends. But I don't think obesity in itself is healthy.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we get start to wrap it up soon. I'll let you go, but I wanted to two questions I love to ask at the end. Firstly, what's one piece of advice you would give to anyone listening? And then I'd love to know who you learn from. I mean, you've mentioned Ben Bickman a couple of times. I think he's my one as well.
Yeah. Yeah. He's incredible. I think the one piece of advice I would give everyone, and this is what I say often, is just don't give up. With your health, with your weight loss, do not throw in the towel. It's worth it. You're worth it. The journey is not always going to be easy, and I think every single person out there knows that. But I would say don't give up when it comes to finding answers about your health. If you get shut down by a practitioner, find another one. I'm very, very passionate about don't take an answer that you don't like and just sit with it and say, well, woe is me, this is how I'm going to live the rest of my life. I don't think that should be the answer. I think you can find somebody. There's enough alternative therapies, and obviously we're focusing so heavy on the ketogenic diet. There are little steps you can do, and if the ketogenic diet seems overwhelming, let's move in baby steps, and we'll get you to where you need to be. But yeah, I think that's super cliche of me to say, but don't give up.
That's true. Yeah, and it is. It's like, I mean, it's like anything in life. I mean, there's good days and bad days, and I think if before we recorded as well, I was saying, or maybe it was in the recording, I can't remember now, but I've had days when I was in the middle of my Hashimotos when nothing was working and everything was, I was feeling crap, trying everything, and I just wanted to jump into bed and pull the doona over my head. And you can do that, but that will pass as well. I mean, I think it's all part of it. There are definitely days like that, but it's like health to me. I mean, another cliche, what else have without health, you've got nothing, right? Like everything builds on that. So it's the one thing in life we should never, ever give up on.
And on those bad days too, Tracy, because I have them too. And also there's seasons. So like I just went through a huge season of my life. I had a baby and I'm breastfeeding a baby now, and like
Mm.
expect things to change and just roll with it and figure out, like, move into the next health season. I think health is a lot like that. It's a journey, and it's a journey you're going to be on till the rest of your life. So own it, because you can take control of it. And I'm a big believer in that, totally. And then you asked, who do I learn from? I've mentioned Dr. Beckman multiple times. He's yeah, I respect him quite a bit. I really like Dr. Jason Fung. I really like Brian Links, and I'm not sure if that Links, if that pronounces his name right. I'm a big fan of most of the Low Carb USA doctors. I think they're
Yes.
awesome. I also really like Max Lugavere. If you're familiar with
Yep.
Max,
Yep.
I like a lot of his stuff as well. Yeah, there's a lot of great Dave Asprey. There's a lot of great biohackers. Sean Wells is a fellow dietitian who's really great. He's incredible with supplements. He's awesome too. So yeah, I probably naming a lot of people you follow and love too. So those I think are my the ones that my go-tos.
Beautiful. Well, you're one of mine, so it's awesome to have been able to chat with you today and to get so much great information from you. Thank you for taking the time to come and to share and keep going doing what you're doing, because you're just making such a difference. It's just, yeah, it's wonderful to meet you.
Likewise, Tracy, and I really, really am honored that you brought me on your podcast. And yeah, it means a lot. So this was fun, and I'm glad we got to connect face to face.
Awesome. Thanks, Temple.
You're welcome.